And now I am very honored to have Kevin joining us on Eyes Left. He's calling in from where he lives in Russellville, Alabama. You'll have to excuse the Skype connection because, as he told me, there is very poor internet where he lives, but it was very much worth it to get this interview with him. We started the conversation with how he ended up in the military to begin with.
Well, I was born in Alabama, and as a kid, we used to see the National Guard for their weekend training or their 2-week, out of the year training, and I always thought that was fascinating. And we always got the little plastic green Army men and the Army trucks and tanks that went along with those things when I was a kid to play with, my brother and I. And my dad was a veteran too. And I have a family history dating all the way back to the American Revolution when William Benderman is listed as a patriot that fought in the Revolution in Columbia, Tennessee. So there's been a Benderman that's worn a uniform for the United States military uniform for about every conflict this country's ever been in.
Wow. And so that, that I'm sure played a big role in kind of shaping your consciousness about joining the military. Was there anything else in your life that led you to make that decision to join? And you joined, I guess, early on in your life, quite a while ago, huh?
Well, I originally joined in 1987 when I was 22 years old. There is a large history, family pride and that kind of thing in the area that I was raised when it comes to military service. That's looked on honor and respect and a lot of pride. So when I got out, I took up a job on a skill that I had before I went in the Army the first time, which was installing floors. And so I decided to do that for a while, but then the situation became such where, for a lot of different reasons, that I no longer wanted to do that. And then I decided that I would re-enter the military and go ahead and retire and get a good retirement out of it. I'd already invested, 4 years active, and then I had the 4 years of individual ready reserve that you have to sign up for on your initial enlistment. And so I figured, they would add that in and I could retire a little bit earlier in life, which I think everyone would like to do that if they could, so.
Right. No, I definitely understand that. And so you go back in 2000, and then not long after you're back in the military, the 9/11 attacks happen. I remember what that was like. had just gotten out of boot camp when the 9/11 attacks happened. So we're both of the generation that was joining at a very different kind of phase in the U.S. military and what it was doing around the world. What was going through your mind at that time when you had joined in basically peacetime, and then all of a sudden it seemed like things were about to change really fast?
Well, it was June of 2000 when I re-entered the military, and after going back through basic training and then going back to the AIT for the job I chose the second time I went in, was a 6-month period in total, because I was a Bradley mechanic, and we just were in there making sure all the vehicles were taken care of, and our scouts and tankers were out doing their thing, their training and getting all their stuff taken care of, when we all got the news that September 11th had happened. And so we all just kind of looked at each other and then said, this is it. And I was thinking to myself, I knew there's a very strong possibility when I raised my right hand. I mean, I never was under the illusion that joining the military was anything other than a fighting force. So, there are benefits that you get from entering the military, but I didn't count that as the primary reason I entered. I knew what I signed up for, and this was it,
Right. And so, 9/11 happens, and then it's like, we're going to Afghanistan. But then you get orders to deploy to Iraq to be a part of the invasion force. And, you probably remember that as things were building, George W. Bush was talking about how, the fight against terror and the global war on terror, we have to go take out Saddam Hussein and liberate the Iraqi people and all that. What were you thinking at that time? All of a sudden, there was this big shift. It was, we have to stop the people that did this on 9/11. Iraq had no role in 9/11. No Iraqis played any role. Saddam Hussein played no role. Was that kind of entering your mind at that moment when you knew that the Iraq war was coming up and that you may be having to go to it?
At the time, I did think, why are we going there? because, as you said, it was the attacks originated from Afghanistan, and Iraq had nothing to do with it. But at that time, it was like, mine is not the reason why. Mine is just a do or die. So gave them a salute and, moved out smartly. Yeah, after we got there, and the very first mission that my unit received, I was with Charlie Troop, and the very first mission that we received was to go guard an oil well and storage facility where we were the only one there. And we spent about 2 weeks there, and I kept wondering to myself, why are we even here? I mean, no one's here but us, And so, but at that point, I was still kind of ambivalent about what we were doing. But I was decided to just see what happened, and so we moved on from there to some different places. And the more we did, and the more we were doing things that were just made no sense to me in a military, tactical, or strategic, I just couldn't figure it out. And so I started having my doubts about midway through my tour there,
And so just to give listeners just a little better idea about what kind of stuff you were doing in Tikrit and when you moved on to that other city, you were a mechanic, but in the first year of the Iraq War, which, we were there at the same time, all jobs kind of changed. You remember that they were like, oh, we only need a small number of troops to do this mission. And then very quickly, it turned out that there was a completely insufficient number of troops. And so everyone just got repurposed. Everyone from intelligence jobs to cooks to mechanics were doing very different roles than just what their, MOS was supposed to be. So what kind of roles did you find yourself in Iraq that was kind of different from what you went through training for at AIT?
Well, the thing that I found that I had nothing to do with was to take custody of the people that we had captured, and transporting them from the front area back to the rear detainment facility, and we would go behind the scouts, because I went forward with the scouts, and if you know what I mean, everybody should know what scouts do. They they're like the forward, they go forward. So I would have to go forward with them to make sure that they didn't need any maintenance support, and I'd be following them, and they would be at a checkpoint or something. I'd be assigned to a checkpoint with them, and yeah, we got shot at more than once while we were back up there supporting those guys.
So you were a mechanic that very quickly became basically an infantry soldier.
Well, the thing that really stood out is we were not fighting any kind of an organized militia or military force whatsoever. We were rousting grandmas and grandpas out of bed at 3 a.m. And at that time, I started thinking, there is no need for me to be pointing an M16 at this little 90-pound, 70-year-old woman as we roused her out of her bed at 3 a.m. I said, never in my life I would be asked to do that in any capacity as a soldier of the United States. That was beyond the pale for me. Another thing that stood out, too, is that when we first got to that town, we had to clear out a building in the middle of the town. And so our company commander and the first sergeant wanted to use that as their temporary command post. And while we were there cleaning it up and getting it secured, and there was a bunch of kids from that town that would come to that building that we had taken over, and they would climb. There was about a 4-foot high little brick wall that was around the building, and they would climb up on that wall and they would laugh. And one or two of them would throw a couple of small pebbles, and we'd tell them to get off the wall. And while we were installing concertina wire around the perimeter, one day the captain came out of the building and told us that if those kids climbed back up on that wall, to shoot them.
Wow.
My guy, I had a specialist and 2 or 3 privates over there. And I just looked at them and like, did I hear that right? And they gave me that look back, and I just looked at the captain, and he turned around and walked back into the building. But there was no way I would have shot a 9-year-old kid. I couldn't believe I heard that. I'm like, what in the hell is wrong with people? I said, I won't do that. I'd shoot that captain before I shot one of those small children.
And you would have been justified in doing so. And so you said about halfway through your deployment, you started questioning things. And And so like that second half of your deployment, what was really going on with you mentally?
All we were doing was harassing the civilian population, and we were there to doggone secure the oil fields, which had nothing to do with the attacks of September the 11th, 2001. And doing all these things that, like, as I said, I never would have thought as a professional soldier anyone would have ever asked me to do anything of that nature. But on our march from Kuwait up to Tikrit over to that town called Konakin, we came to a huge storage depot that was full of standard ammunition. You know, it had machine gun rounds, mortar rounds, tank rounds, and a few hand grenades laying around there. And we moved in to secure that. And so the NCO for the mortar platoon sent two of his guys down there, a private first class and a private, to start loading those mortars on the truck. Got down there, they had one of them was on the truck, and one of them was picking up the mortars and handing it to the other guy, and they were stacking them in the truck, which is what they should have been doing. But then Sergeant First Class Kelly comes down there, pissing and moaning and raising hell, telling them they're moving too slow, and he just started throwing those mortars on the truck. So, you know, a PFC and a private, they're all, yes, Sergeant, you know, and they jumped down and started tossing mortars on the truck. And one of them landed on the fuse and exploded, and that was our first casualty that I'm aware of, and it was caused by our very own acting first sergeant, a complete idiot.
Yeah, I mean, that's a common theme with soldiers, resistance, and rebellion, right? Is just the incompetence of the people that are in charge of them, the unnecessary risk of life and the lives of others and of civilians by just like incompetent, stupid, like award-chasing officers and high-ranking NCOs.
Oh yeah, they were extremely, they were childish in their approach to war. Captain, the one I told you told us to shoot kids, Captain Morgado. They brought in this other captain. On the way into our AO, he had saw a horse, you know, a statue of some horse that was in the town, and it was a stud horse, and it had all the right equipment. And so this idiot told two of our mechanics to go over there and get that horse and cut his genitals off so he can back and put it on his wall. I'm like, this is some fraternity crap that you do in college. This is real world stuff where people are dying, you know.
One of the things, of course, that's making your consciousness shift is, you know, you said the idea of what the mission was about went up in smoke. You know, you were guarding oil fields, and that was a very on-the-nose representation of what you're doing there. Then you have this element of your command was just incompetent. They were brutal. They were ordering you to do things that you could never picture yourself doing. You know, they're putting people's lives in danger by just being incompetent leaders. And of course, those things are very much things that would make you not want to be a part of it anymore, just for your own self-preservation. Like, your life is in the hand of people you very much do not trust. But then there's this other element, and that's your recognition of what the war was like for the people that lived in the country. I remember there was an NPR interview you did where you described a young girl who was seriously wounded on the side of the road. And talk about how this element kind of played into your moral transformation there. It wasn't just that your life was in danger by dumb officers, or that you weren't going to get killed for George W. Bush's oil contracts. There is this other thing playing out in your consciousness as well. And that was like the impact on people that, you had no reason to, see as your enemy.
Again, I mean, I don't want to blow my own horn, but you met me in person. I mean, and you've seen how big I am. I had no business over there harassing those tiny little people, the grandparents and children, and I just couldn't. My command structure of the country that I swore an oath to would ever put me in a position to do something of that nature. That little girl that I described, we passed her up on the side of the road, and I don't know if that woman was her mother or her sister or her aunt or who she was, but she was crying. The little girl was crying. They were waving at us, and we just drove right on by them, left her laying there. We were over there hurting them, the things that we were doing wasn't stopping any of the people that did shoot at us, but and that was a big part of why I said I wanted no part of it. It's just not right.